everyone. Wherever you're joining us from, we hope that you're well and safe. My name is Marilyn Zakhour. I'm the founder of Cosmic Centaurs, a leadership and organizational development firm based in the GCC. Today marks the beginning of week 3 of our 7th annual Cosmic Conference, which has been a 3-week virtual gathering, started on March 25th and will be running till the end of this week, April 17th. This year's conference is titled Grounded and Limitless, Leading Organizations That Survive and Thrive, and it's designed to support leaders navigating sustained uncertainty. At its heart, this idea of being both grounded and limitless is about both facing reality with clarity, but also continuing to imagine and build what is possible. Over the course of the conference, we brought together more than 20 leaders, academics, and practitioners to explore what leadership demands in moments like these, through 3 themes matched to the 3 weeks. Week 1 was about enduring. We explored how we sustain ourselves and our organizations through the first waves of uncertainty. Week 2 was about adapting, on how we evolve in response to change. And now, as we begin week 3, we turn to thrive, examining how we transform the lessons of crisis into a competitive advantage, emerging stronger, more innovative, and better prepared for the future. For today's session, Present and Future, Leading When the Crisis Doesn't End, Claudia Zeisberger, who I'll introduce shortly, and I invite you to engage actively. Please share your reflections, your questions, and your experiences in the chat. And if you found value in these sessions and would like to give us something in return, we'd greatly appreciate your participation in our Leading in the Arab World survey. We're gathering insights on how leaders in our region are navigating uncertainty so others around the world can learn from these experiences. Our team will share the link in the chat. It only takes 5 minutes, and it would mean the world to us. And with that, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Claudia Zeisberger. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Marilyn, for having me. I look forward to it.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled to be having these conversations. I know so are a lot of INSEADers waiting for this. Let me just do a quick introduction for those of us who don't know you. Claudia is a professor of entrepreneurship, family enterprise at INSEAD. She's the author of Mastering Private Equity and the founder of Global Private Equity Initiatives. She's one of the best networked figures in the private capital space, combining deep academic experience with over 35 years of experience in financial markets. As a professor at INSEAD, she teaches all things related to private capital, and as the founder of INSEAD's Global Private Equity Initiatives, she's helped shape the school's reputation in private equity and venture capital, as well as turnaround management, and I was a student of that class and never forgot the lessons from that moment. She is an active investor in startups, as well as private equity, secondary, and founder-focused funds. She serves as an advisor to boards, leadership teams, and governments, and brings seasoned judgment, independent perspective, and candor to her role as a self-described professional devil's advocate. I really love that part. Claudia is a founding member of KKR's Sustainability Expert Advisory Council and serves as the advisory boards of Standard Chartered Ventures, Linzer Capital, Kaizenvest, and S4 Learning. She's also the founder of 5 Quadrants, a research and risk advisory firm. Widely recognized for her teaching excellence, she's received INSEAD's Best Teaching Award for the Private Equity Elective 3 years running and has been on the Dean's List for Excellence in Teaching every year since 2008. And she has a massive fandom in INSEAD, and I'm sure that I'm joined by many of my colleagues today. And last but not least, she's also the author of the best-selling book, Mastering Private Equity, now in its 2nd edition, and a sought-after speaker at the intersection of finance, innovation, and risk. We have a lot to learn from you today, Claudia. I'm going to start just by setting a little frame for what we're hoping to discuss. Of course, with everything that's unfolding in the world today, we are definitely in a situation of crisis with heightened uncertainty. And while in the past we might have seen crises as a temporary event, with a beginning, a middle, and eventually an end, something to navigate through before we return to our baseline, that baseline may no longer exist, and volatility has become the context, not the exception. In many of the environments that Claudia has worked in and studies, whether it's in private equity or turnaround situations, this isn't a theoretical question. It's reality. Businesses operate under pressure with limited time, constrained resources, no guarantee of recovery. There is no pause button, no clear horizon, only the need to act and to act decisively. And leadership in those conditions is about creating direction while the ground is still moving. This brings us to a very real tension, which is what we're exploring today. On the one hand, leaders are managing the immediacy of the situation, liquidity pressures, operational disruption, rapid decision-making with imperfect data, often where the cost of delay is higher than the cost of being wrong. And on the other hand, they're being asked to reimagine the future, questioning whether the current business model is still viable, what needs to be restructured, and where value can be rebuilt or even reinvented. And this tension, leading in the present while reshaping the future, is what we're going to explore today. So, Claudia, I'm going to jump right in with our first question. This idea that we are now leading in a prolonged crisis, that there is not really a beginning, a middle, or an end, and that on top of it, we have the polycrisis, which is this layering of a lot of crises at the same time. In your experience and all of the various organizations that you've worked with and studied, what distinguishes a short-term crisis from a prolonged one?
So first, thank you again for having me, and maybe just to put some color on this, on how I look at this right now. I mean, we have right now more than one crisis running in parallel. So there is the energy crisis driven by the closure of Hormuz, but that very, very quickly also has led to questions around food security, has led to questions around business models. Are business models being disrupted? If you can't get things from A to B in a form that you did before, how else can you basically execute? So both crises are kind of like making their way through this world right now. And obviously that's super complicated for anyone who's leading a global business. So I think what I would like people to have in their background is a question a question I'm asking myself. When we look back, so as a European, obviously I was very much aware and obviously educated in all the post-World War II effort by the United States to rebuild post an extended war. And my question though is, whilst America was clearly part of building or potentially even the architect of the old trading system, the old system of doing business, it may be others that are building the future trading system. So it may not include the United States. And I know this may be a strong statement to start off with, but let's just keep this in the back of our mind as we're basically going through your questions and focusing on the crisis. Because what it will do, it will kind of force us to question whether we are solving the crisis to go back to what we came from a month ago or 6 weeks ago. So, or are we building for something that will be potentially very new, which means opportunity. It also means a little bit of concern, obviously, because it's unknown. And in general, as humans, we don't like the unknown. So now you basically asked me about if this basically turns into a prolonged crisis. And this ties nicely into the setup the food for thought I just put out there. How do you basically manage? I mean, as you will remember from the class, we talk very intensely about that in our turnaround discussions. What do you do when you manage basically a crisis? Obviously, as a CFO, as a CXO, you immediately look at your cash, your reserves. You think about preserving liquidity. You sit basically on outgoing cash, and you control incoming mail, as we used to call it. Nowadays, this would be incoming requests or emails. So prolonged crisis, this is all nice and fine at the beginning of any crisis, to really be on top of your existing business. How much cash do you have left? If revenues drop by 30, 50, 80% for the next month or two, how will you operate? Do you have to tighten the hatches? And what does this mean for your business? Now, when we go into a prolonged crisis, that requires a little bit more structural rethinking, because the pre-crisis state may not be coming back. And that basically is kind of like the danger basically there, is that treating a structural shift as a temporary disruption. So basically waiting as a management team for normalization, or as we used to call it, let's go back to the new normal. But what we really meant is like, let's go back to the way things were in the past. Now, if that normalization never arrives, you are basically solving with the wrong output in mind. And the longer the crisis runs, the more temporary responses harden into kind of permanent new operating realities. So I think the question should not be, or is not, when will things return to normal? The question is, what will be the new normal? And are you building for the new normal, or are you waiting for the old one to return? So, and again, pending what industry you are operating in, pending which country you are listening to this, that you're sitting in right now in the middle of April 2026, the answers will be very, very, very different and very distinct. Does that kind of like give you some food?
Thank you. That's a great setup, actually. I really, this week, the week of Thrive is all about saying that actually there is never really a return to normal, even though maybe a few decades ago it might have felt that way for a little bit. We're always going into a new state. And I think your setup is beautiful because it invites us, on the one hand, to imagine what that state might be and build a company that is ready for it. And on the other, to also make sure that we exist by the time it arrives. And so my question to you is, we're going to travel from the present to the future and back today, because it's, on the one hand, as you mentioned, like in turnaround management, the first things you start to do are very specific. We know them, they're textbook. But today it's a little bit more difficult because we don't know when we can say that it's in a turnaround situation. In a way, like we know when we're okay again, because a lot of it is in the control of the firm in some way, because it's a crisis that was created by the firm as opposed to one that was created just by the environment. Whereas here we don't have a sense of time. So time is a little bit elusive for us as leaders. And so how would you advise us? First, let's start with the present. So how would you advise leaders today, from everything that you've seen, again, through the turnaround cases or private equity, to think about our decision-making, how we look at risk and how we manage even just our cash and our existing structure today. And then later we'll talk about how we can take a step back and rethink the business for the future.
So I think I like to think of crisis as moments of opportunity as well. So I had a very senior guest in class many moons ago, and he basically said, look, you have to just look at this as never waste a good crisis. Now, what does this mean? It means that you should really see it also as an opportunity to question the fundamentals, to question really the assumptions that you've had and that may have done well for you and your business for the last 10, 20 years. So how basically can your business basically exist in that new normal that we're potentially going to? Most importantly, how can your business, as we're kind of like gaining maybe more certainty around what the new normal may be, how can your business be set up to be flexible as we're going through those conversations, as we're going through those, the rebuilding of the business, if you like. So I think it basically gives us a chance to kind of question what we've been doing, think about better ways of doing it, and using the time right now where your business may be less active, where you may have more resources in terms of employees to bring around the table, to basically ask them to brainstorm and to find out what they've potentially been thinking about all the time but never dared to raise. So I think the rethinking of your business in this situation right now is an opportunity that should not be underappreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I think it's a collective effort and a collective experience, and not just one that the leader or the leadership team can take on their own. When we spoke about how to think about this, one of the things you spoke to me about is this idea of running scenarios to stress test your organization, like being able to understand what are the limits of the scenarios that your organization can sustain. Can you talk me through that again, please?
Yeah, I mean, when your business is in steady state, you basically should consider vulnerabilities in your business, because those vulnerabilities, they're always there, right? It's just that in good times, rising tide floats all boats, right? So at that point, it doesn't surface where the stress points are, but it gives you an opportunity to actually come up with certain scenarios. So for example, what would happen if certain infrastructure gets damaged? What are the workarounds? Who jumps in? Whether it is that and plenty of the oil companies have always basically run those kind of scenarios. What if any of the storage facilities are basically succumbing to fire? For example, it does not always have to be a drone attack or a war, but what do we do if any of our infrastructure is damaged? How do we deal with this? And basically play those scenarios through. So the moment those vulnerabilities surface, which will always be during times of stress, you immediately have your playbook ready. What's also important is that you revise those playbooks as your business grows. So I've seen quite often companies relying on existing playbooks still being okay, but the playbooks have not considered them expanding into China, making further acquisitions, growing as a business. So that's kind of like an ongoing process. Vulnerabilities will always be there. Be aware of your vulnerabilities, have a playbook ready on what happens if basically any of those vulnerabilities become real crisis scenarios. So I think that is something to consistently have in mind. And I mean, we've seen in the past, I mean, we've had plenty of situations. If you remember during COVID, let's jump to airlines. We've had airlines that were very much ready to decide to pivot into different businesses. Emirates pivoting very quickly to its cargo when humans stopped basically traveling. Decisions that were made on what to do with the planes. Do we park them? Do we keep them basically at the airport, and so on? Again, those I think COVID has probably taught most companies on taking such kind of stress testing scenarios a little bit serious and really considering what would be a useful or a meaningful response for your business.
Yes, absolutely. And if I can make a little plug, actually, we have Loïc Moutot, who is the exiting global CEO of Mars Pet Care, who's joining us later this week. And he spoke to me about those playbooks. You know, he made this joke about how they used to be things you dusted off every once in a while. And actually, he'll talk to us himself about the kind of processes that they put in place to do exactly what you're talking about, Claudia, which is to have the discipline of continuous crisis assessment, management, scenario testing, and planning, which is really impressive. Obviously, for someone that runs a really small business like mine, that may not be possible, but for global organizations, that's definitely part of the playbook today. And he's going to share direct examples of how they've done it. So I think that's a really powerful, capability to integrate back. How do you know? You spoke about we are going into a new normal. The future will not look like the past. How, as a business leader, can you know if you have to change the basic parameters of your business or not? How would you approach thinking about it?
I think you basically have to really have an honest conversation with yourself, because we all have, as all of us certainly know, we have certain biases, we have certain fallbacks, we have personalities, we have go-to scenarios that we would like to explore. I think what is important as the leader of a business, especially when you have many that are looking to you specifically in crisis for guidance, what is important is for you to ensure that you are keeping your eyes wide open and managing what actually is happening right now. So what we find very often that in crisis scenarios, teams very often fall back to managing a crisis they are comfortable with. So I call it, you start managing the crisis that you wish you had, rather than the crisis that is unfolding right now. So to your question, how can you ensure that that you are really looking at the facts at hand? Again, encouraging your team to raise their viewpoints, to put basically everything on the table. Times of crisis are not a time where you want to basically toe the party line, if you like. So this is a time where it's really all hands on deck. You need everyone in the team to bring their experience, their expertise, and their viewpoint to the table, especially when you're running larger conglomerates, where you by definition cannot be an expert in whatever the individual business under your global brand are doing. So I think it's really important. So what I would advise is ensure that you have someone in your corner that helps you to ensure that you can honestly look at the task at hand. So you're out with a clear goal that you're managing the crisis that we have, not the crisis that you wish you had and that you were ready for potentially, and inviting your team to honestly basically share where they are seeing kind of the issues, where they're seeing problems, where they are asking questions, allowing them to honestly ask questions and put them on the table. And admittedly, in times of crisis, especially prolonged crisis, you may not have immediate answers, right? But as you mentioned earlier at the beginning of the talk, you very often have to be biased towards action. Waiting is often not an option. So you unfortunately have to live as uncomfortable as this may be, with an attitude that basically says, better roughly right than exactly wrong. So analysis may not be possible. You may not have enough data. You may not have the time to put all the data together. So again, an experienced team around the table, talking honestly, voicing their questions honestly, trying to focus on the crisis that is unfolding rather than the crisis that they wish they could solve.
Yes, absolutely. And I really also see, especially in this region, leadership teams saying there were parts of our business that were average even before this crisis that we were living with because they were still alive and they were doing what they were supposed to. And in some ways, now's an opportunity to rethink that from the ground up.
Yeah. Can I just jump in? I think it's one of those. I mean, I ask myself, when it comes to turnarounds in businesses, why are we still teaching turnarounds after all those years, right? I mean, you would think by now, why are companies basically not fixing themselves, right? Why is there still kind of the role of turnaround consultants out there? So big shout out to all the turnaround consultants. So of course, and the answer is simply we, and by we, I mean businesses, only change when we have to. And usually that means a stress scenario. It usually means revenue dropping. It usually means financial stress. Now, if we can, inside an organization, set up tools and set up processes that raise some of those things that may still be working okay, but may really be not that perfect anymore, and really bring them to the table, whether or not in a crisis situation, that would be the ultimate goal. But unfortunately, I mean, I have to say, after all those years, it's still basically companies basically change when they have to.
I think that's a really great insight. And I agree with you. There's nothing wrong with wanting to sit in our comfort for a while, but yes, that can definitely sometimes put our organizations at risk. Do you have an example? You shared Emirates earlier. What I always find in conversations with leaders is that everybody will nod in agreement when we talk about the importance of both managing the core business and then also thinking about the future, even in peacetime, right? Like we'll all agree to it. And we all think, of course, yes, it's very important that we keep innovating, questioning what we're doing, so on and so forth. And yet there aren't that many organizations that do this at the system level very well. So that where it isn't about a single person or a leader or someone shouting out loud, but that really have strong systems for how to do that. Are there examples that you particularly like of a company that you've seen do this really, really well?
So, I mean, you have all those, you have different examples. I mean, maybe we'll stage this right now and maybe go to my home country. Basically, let's go to Germany and Japan, right? With the with the crisis around energy supply, all of a sudden hitting again. Questions being raised. Can we bring back, for example, some of the old infrastructure, like power plants? Can we bring them back on stream? Can we somehow basically solve that? Similar discussions from what I'm seeing are happening in the Middle East, right? So can old infrastructure in terms of pipelines be repurposed? Can it be modernized? Can we bring it back on stream? And how fast can we basically do that? I appreciate this is super complicated in the energy space, but again, just the fact that those conversations are happening, that's exactly basically crisis more often than not, even on a government level, kind of, how should I call it, maybe unfreezes some of those conversations. I mean, I see conversations around the world that are happening right now that, to be honest, I think would have not been possible and would have never been started 2 months ago. So it was either not acceptable, or even if you would have started a conversation, no one would have taken you serious and no one would have actually said that, okay, let's sit down, let's have a conversation around that. So I'm basically, I find this fascinating that we're bringing this basically up right now. And those are good conversations. I'm not saying these are not conversations we shouldn't have. But I think we probably should have had those conversations at some point also earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. We've spoken a lot about large organizations and global firms. We have a question from Onur in the audience who says, I'd also like to ask about the startup environments. Dynamics are quite different for us, both from a risk and opportunities perspective. What would be your top 3 considerations, including the lack of funding or cancellation of committed inflows due to the geopolitics?
So actually, this is a really nice touch point, which I have to say I didn't really consider that when I launched the Turnaround Elective 15 years ago. But it really touches, you're spot on very nicely on startups. Because if you think about it, startups are by definition as an organization default debt. Right. By definition, you have negative cash flow. By definition, you need to raise funding regularly. If that regular fundraising cycle is for whatever reason cut off, then you need to change course. You're absolutely right. There are real learnings in turnarounds for startup founders. Right now, there's basically for startup founders, really basically think about how to pivot. Is there anything in your business that you can pivot towards that potentially wasn't part of your, let's call it, grand plan, but that could potentially generate revenue at an earlier point? Is there anything where you can say, okay, we can basically reuse or reutilize a certain talent, a certain product that we have, and just generate revenue? So that would allow you to tread water for the time being as you are starting to revisit your fundraising strategy. So, and for example, I mean, fundraising maybe in the Middle East right now would take a little bit longer to come back on stream. Are there anywheres to go for you to other places where your fundraising may be interesting? Could you move your company to another location, thereby attract different types of funding? Again, in the day and age of, and again, this is very specific to the business, in the day and age of AI, there are many possibilities on how to collaborate as well with other startups and potentially arrive at a partnership that would allow you to, again, offer a service, build a product that potentially really attracts interest from a paying audience. This is a much longer conversation, but I kind of fit it into the box.
No, for sure. I think a lot of, again, what I've seen from leaders in the region is reconsidering maybe clients that did not fit in their ideal client profile in the past, looking at services or products that maybe they, as you said, were no longer part of the grand plan, but are going to allow us to unlock a bit of cash in the short term. I've seen a lot of these pivots in the kind of smaller organizations here, so I can definitely see that in action. Okay, we talked a little bit about how to think about, how to sustain yourself right now. We want to talk a little bit about how to plan for the future. There are two questions from the audience. One is really broad from Sandra, which is, what's the new normal in your opinion? You touched on this earlier. And then Man, more specifically, in the scenario where the global trade blueprint shifts away from US-centric architecture, what do you see as the clearest risks or opportunities in the near term? Tough one.
So I'm going to anchor on the last half of the very long question, the last sentence. So opportunities kind of going forward in the near term. I think and again, let's start off on the government level. I think on a government level, there will be no government out there that will not be seriously considering or reconsidering their energy policy. And again, different countries will have different answers to that. We see already now different approaches to that problem in China versus Europe, even inside Europe, different countries with different approaches. So as always, this goes back to my comment early on, never waste a good crisis. This may be an opportunity for people in those countries that were trying to drive a certain diversification of energy policy to finally be heard. Secondly, I think that, and we're seeing that already now in terms of fundraising and funds flowing in that direction, we will see a reconsideration of alternative energies. There's no doubt in my mind. And again, this has always been there. And yes, we've had the heydays in the 2019 till 2022, and then it kind of tapered off again. But all the alternative energy sources, obviously, we are now much further along in terms of innovation and energies. Let's see basically what will emerge as a potential second leg or alternative source. I mean, you can combine this with the incredible story over the last 10 days from Artemis, from outer space. So, and as I was watching those incredible photos coming in from the crew, I couldn't help but thinking that something that I've said for the last 20 years, I firmly believe in the kind of ingenuity of humankind. And I believe that in the next decade, we'll find an energy source that has not even been discovered yet. So, I mean, I hope all the hydrogen founders and solar energy and wind energy and all those projects will do well. But I have a suspicion that we may find energy sources that have not been explored yet. So it may sound a bit sci-fi, but I thought, as I was thinking about it last week, and as Marilyn asked about it, let's put this in here.
No, I love that. And I like you, I'm a deep believer in human ingenuity. And I think that somehow, maybe it's a bit optimistic and naive, but somehow we figure a way forward out, right?
Oh, absolutely. But I'm a glass half full kind of person. Look, if you wouldn't be a glass half full kind of person, how could you teach venture capital? How could you work with entrepreneurs? And how could you teach turnaround? So we're pretty much there. The statistics, the odds, if you like, are clearly stacked against you.
Absolutely. So being an optimist and talking about, earlier you said, never waste a good crisis. It is very important that leaders focus on managing not the crisis that they wish were happening, but the one that is, and really being able to think about their future positioning. When you look at companies, what separates those that adapt and innovate and manage to get on top of a crisis versus those that don't? Is it leadership? Is it structure? Is it their financial position? Is it their organizational culture? Like, if we were trying to diagnose what makes a company more ready than another to be able to do this, what would you name?
I mean, leadership. Look, I mean, volumes of books have been written around that. Leadership really matters because, again, in times of crisis, people inside the organization will be looking towards leadership for answers, for guidance, or at least for an indication where to look. But I think what separates those organizations that can, pivot and react faster is really the culture that they've created of allowing information to move upwards, to allow information from anyone in the organization to rise to the top. So let me give you some context on that. So when we do research on turnarounds, very often, I mean, the playbook is very much is very clear. If you come in as a turnaround CEO, as a turnaround consultant into an organization, the one thing you do, you basically do your walk around. That means you talk to everyone in the organization. And it doesn't matter who you speak to, they all will basically say, look, ultimately, the answer on what needs to be done in a turnaround situation was always there in the organization. There were people that for years may have said, this is not working, we need to change this. It's just a matter of time before we basically hit the wall. So to me, what that means, even in a situation like most of our listeners probably find themselves in, where the crisis is being brought to you from the outside in very clearly. Again, you have knowledge inside your team. You have knowledge inside your organization. Allow that knowledge to emerge and let those conversations flow. Obviously, it is useful if you've built that kind of culture and information sharing throughout the years before the crisis starts. So allowing information to flow upwards and decide basically what you and kind of like hopefully learn from that and then decide what you're building for in the future is really, really useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first response to a complex environment is sensing, and that comes through trying to find as much information and then find the patterns within it. You mentioned the walk around as a simple tool. So just going around, talking to people, whether physically in a space, we do this a lot with our clients, virtually, of course. Are there any other ways that you've seen this information flow be well established in a firm?
You mean like examples, or where does it work?
Yeah, very practically, like how would a leader go about, let's say they didn't build this capability during peacetime and they're trying to figure it out right now. So talking to people, as simple as that, always going back to the basics. But what else?
I mean, you can put in some very random things. I mean, so for example, why not organize kind of like random lunches with people randomly selected in the organization, or random meetings wherever you're traveling to, if you're a global organization. So yes, there will be your senior management meetings, but why not have a sit down with no more than 7-8 people no more than 10 for sure around the table, that basically can then sit down and talk to you. I mean, initially this will, depending what culture you're in, basically throw up quite a bit of concern amongst people. So it has to be done in a way that people feel like they're being invited. It's not kind of like a spying activity, but you're really asking for their honest feedback and their honest bottom-up approach. So that could be one part. And then nowadays, I mean, you have plenty of tools that allow you to just create like mailboxes, suggestions. Obviously, the moment you create those, it has to be clear as well that those mailboxes are being monitored. So it's not just yet another button on the corporate website where people can basically drop their suggestions in and no one ever picks up on about it. Now, if suggestions are being picked up and if those suggestions are being implemented, then basically it's important to tell the story around that this kind of idea, this product, this solution came from so-and-so in the branch in Switzerland or in the branch in Tokyo and so on, and basically tell the story around it. So changing that kind of culture, it takes time, it takes commitment, and it takes consistency. So, and obviously it takes basically, as in any crisis, it takes the dedication to communication, right? If anything, over communicate or start increasing your communications during times of crisis, even if you're a kind of regular and consistent communicator during good times.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love all those examples. A fun one, I think I read in an article somewhere, was a company that went back and re-looked at all the projects that had been rejected. Because as you say, oftentimes the solution were already being laid out by some people, just the system was rejecting them all the time. So that was an interesting one.
Yeah.
And to your point,
companies in general are incredibly creative and innovative. I mean, the amount of innovations, I mean, the stories around innovations that were sitting somewhere on a shelf inside their R&D office, inside their lab, that were never commercialized just because of whatever, lack of communication or decision. And when they were ultimately commercialized, they literally contributed tremendously to the revenue of the organization. So there's plenty inside organizations to be proud of and to be worked on. So if you allow for those ideas to emerge, I think it will be good, not just in times of crisis.
Absolutely. Another question that I often get after that is like, okay, we've listened, we've gotten the ideas. Let's talk about the finances here. One of the people that I've learned from says we have a capex and an opex, but no stratex, meaning we don't have money put aside in order to spend on, innovation, on experimentation. How do you think about that from a financial perspective? Where do we get the funds to then enable all of these great ideas to come to life?
Well, I mean, that very much depends on your business, but let's say that way. I mean, if there are businesses, and I would argue actually in this day and age with innovation changing and changes happening faster than we thought before, and I'm not talking about the crisis in the Middle East right now, I'm talking about in general. As an organization, I don't think you have an option but to invest in innovation, invest in research, and invest in new ideas. Now, how can you arguably do that? You find your funding, and I firmly believe that money is never the problem, that it can be found. But then very often what obviously is important, that you control how you balance the support of the incumbent corporate versus the funding of the innovation. And there, I mean, think of it like creating a space where innovation is allowed to happen. Call that space a sandbox. And inside that sandbox, you have process on how to access certain funding. I'm thinking about an investment committee type process where you're literally pitching your ideas in that sandbox to people that are in charge of the innovation. And there basically, I mean, we've seen a lot of corporates make significant progress. I call it corporate venturing and innovation. which is one of the courses that I teach as well. And I've done a lot of work with corporates. I've seen corporates do really, really well with that, but I've also seen corporates really struggle in setting it up. And I think the cleanest way is to say, okay, here is my sandbox. The sandbox gets a certain budget. There will be certain people that will be in charge of that sandbox. And whatever happens in the sandbox, we will just allow for that to emerge, because you don't want large corporations to interfere with new ideas too early on. So, because that very often stifles innovation, stops innovation, and so on. And I mean, we could go into venture building, working with startups and so on. There's a whole process around what happens in the sandbox. But if you can get yourself comfortable that what can you afford to allocate to innovation? How can that sandbox be funded? And then you can sit down and find ways to make the most out of the budget that you may have. But I think as an established organization, you need to create spaces for innovation, for thinking outside the box.
Thank you for that. We have a question that relates to it, but is from the perspective of PE. So speaking of creating the space or of allowing new innovation to emerge for an already, so this is Imad, he says, from an already raised PE fund, how would you reapproach LPs to change the targeted sector in the prospectus to exploit more relevant opportunities arising from the current situation than perhaps what was originally planned?
I think you just have to, whatever your process is based on your LPA, you sit down first with your LPAC. You see basically the LPAC for listeners is a group of 5 to 10 LPs, depending on how large your fund is. And they are basically the go-to for the private equity fund manager, the partner inside the fund, the go-to team to say, hey, we have an idea. What do you think? We would, for example, like to change the mandate, because when we raised the fund, let's say 3 or 4 years ago, the world was a different place. We see opportunity somewhere else. This is not a new playbook, okay? So this was done, Sequoia did that during the global financial crisis in India, where they basically, where funds suggested to their LPs, allow us to invest in public markets. This is not why we were raised, but we see opportunity in public markets. It went very well for them. So the LPs obviously never complained. But you need to, there's no hard and fast rule, but you need to sit down with your LPs. So I would sit down with the LPAC first. They should get you a pretty good idea. And again, I think every investor right now, small or large, or wherever you're sitting in the world, you are looking at this new world and you're probably sitting on the fence on many questions, right? Whether it is public versus private market, whether it is remaining invested in the US versus investing more in Europe. I've had quite a lot of conversations around that. We saw a lot of more investors basically pivoting out of the US into Europe, right? I don't know how this will play out going forward, but just from what we saw in the past. So I think you will find open doors with LPs to have a kind of like a well thought through conversation on what you should or should not be doing with your portfolio right now. And if there's opportunity and you can argue that you are the one that can bring that opportunity to them, all the power to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. I love that answer. Another question from Sandra, which I also find really interesting. What, if at all, do you see as the impact on governance and corporate structures and management roles in light of the new normal that we're entering into? Any impact on boards, on management roles, on corporate structures?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is really a much longer conversation, but and obviously also very bespoke to the organization, depending on where you are already now, depending what industry you are in. But let's say it that way. Whatever industry you are in, you will have to deal with new technology, with AI. You will have to live in a world that is much more influenced, let's say generically, by AI. Obviously, if you are a researcher in biotech, that will have a different impact than if you are running the car workshop that was just fixing my pickup truck down the road. So, but still, none of those businesses will remain untouched by the new technology. So I think that also means that your decision-making processes inside the organization will be influenced by AI. I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of whether in a good way or in a bad way. This is a much longer conversation to be had. But yes, I think our decision-making, our governance frameworks will be changing. We'll have to adjust. We will have to make choices to what extent we allow certain processes to be managed by AI, to what extent we will have human influence in charge of certain decisions. I think this would even have been a very different conversation in October last year than it is right now, given the development and capabilities we have seen. Maybe just a comment on the recent developments around cyber risk. I have forever refused to call it cybersecurity because I always believed that there never was security when it came to anything cyber related. But with the emergence of AI, this opens questions that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, are really, really important for us to answer. And that clearly will influence the way companies will run themselves. I mean, cyber risk remains until today, and has been for the last 5 years, amongst the top 3 agenda points on every board agenda. Doesn't matter where you look in the world. So this has been top of mind for board members for a long time. So it has just basically been put at maybe number 1 post for now. So it's a complicated question, but I think, yes, we will see organizations and governance structures of organizations change in the coming decade. By the way, that applies even sitting for me at INSEAD. I mean, that applies to educational institutions as well.
Yeah, that's an absolutely great point. And while, I think it's a very difficult one to answer. And as you said, Claudia, like, just give it another 2 months and we'll have new capabilities that we need to think of and address. But for sure, it's something we can't escape. And maybe, I've worked with a few of our clients have been in kind of the cybersecurity space. And to your point, it's always on the top agenda of boards, but somehow always postponed in terms of spending by leaders. And I think now that won't be an option anymore. I think it was right this week that Anthropic said, we will not release the next model because it's too powerful and companies aren't ready for it. From a cybersecurity perspective, I see that. And I'll also add, for anyone who is interested in the governance side of things, we have a session later this week. I'm plugging a lot of our sessions this week, but we have a session later this week with another INSEAD professor, Jose Santos, on Thursday. He won't be talking specifically about the impact of AI on governance, but he'll talk about the role of governance in managing uncertainty alongside management. So that could be an interesting one for those who are into that topic. Claudia, we're almost getting to the end of it, but before our lightning round, there are a lot of questions from the audience around the leadership aspect of this. 1 second before we get there. There's many, from Leah, from Jason, from Matt. I'm not going to ask all of them, but I will ask you maybe like a combined question, which is, you spoke earlier about the importance of communication. You spoke earlier about the importance of making organizations feel heard and taking action on the feedback that you receive. Generally, what have you seen as being the great qualities of leadership in managing a process of, adjusting to a new reality, with communication being one of them? Anything else that you'd bring out here?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good question. And I work with many senior executives on many levels. And the one quality that I find that allows them to remain effective and efficient in good times and in times of crisis is the capability to step away from it, to take a step back. And I mean, today, in this day and age, that's really, really difficult. So why? Because anything can arrive on your desk 24/7, and and you're expected to react and act immediately. It's hard, but you should try to resist that tendency to fall into that trap of more and more in the same period of time. So what I mean by that, find your space, whatever that is. Find time, find an opportunity to unplug, step away, turn everything off, spend time away from wherever you normally spend your time. So just to give you a different perspective, a way to get away. It can be lying on the couch and reading a good book. It can be going for a marathon or running or doing your workouts every morning, whatever it may be. I've seen many different executives have very different ways, but find something that is yours, that is not related to, that you control, and that is not related to the business at hand, to ideally not connected to your job. And most of all, find something that you truly, deeply enjoy.
Thank you. That's really great advice. And is actually a great transition to our lightning round, because I have a few more questions of a similar nature for you. These are questions that we ask every single one of our speakers. We're almost at the hour together, Claudia. I think there's so many more questions, by the way, from the audience, and I had many more questions to ask you. So that tells you how much you've made us think and become curious about how we can be better leaders. But we need to wrap this up, unfortunately, and I will ask you our four lightning round questions. Are you ready?
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so this one is really personal, and it's about you. What keeps you personally grounded? You've given us a lot of examples of what it can be for others, but what is your way of staying grounded as a leader?
To me, it's basically getting away. My sport, and if I can afford it, if I have the time, to spend time with my horses. So that is basically my go-to, always has been my go-to. If I need to basically just get away from it, I have a deep connection with horses. I grew up with horses. So that's basically where I go to, if I can do so. If not, it's the gym and my personal trainers. Big shout out to my personal trainers.
Absolutely. I love these examples because a lot of leadership lives in our head. And so living in our body for a little bit is always a good thing.
Oh, yeah, especially when you come to my age. So it's super important.
You spoke to us about being a glass half full kind of person. What helps you to stay limitless, regardless of the circumstances, to keep possibility and imagination and curiosity alive for yourself?
I mean, to be honest, it's my students. It's my students around me. I mean, don't forget, I mean, I'm in a very unique position. If you think, for 20 years, every time I step into class, I have a new group of 26 to 29-year-olds around me. So they don't age. I do, but only a little bit. So, and to me, that was the reason why I stayed with INSEAD, why I did not go back into banking. And it really, they may not know that, but they may come to me for questions. But because the questions that they ask me, it really keeps me on my toes. And it really gives me an idea on what the young generation is thinking, what the next generation is thinking. So yeah, big thank you to all of them for it. And I'm sure many alumni are listening. So you guys were all at one point in those that asked questions and asked for office hours. So I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's great to be around people that keep you young. I know you're not presently in the region, but of course you're connected, whether through INSEAD and all these alumni that you've taught to the Arab world. What is one leadership quality that you've seen emerged in the last few weeks that you think the rest of the world can learn from?
I think staying calm in times of stress. I've had over the last 5 years opportunity to be in and out of the Middle East and in many different opportunities, and I really, really enjoyed the work I've done with various organizations and governments. And so when basically when war started, I reached out on WhatsApp and on email to people that I knew. And I was quite say, how are you? Are you there? Have you left? Are you still there? And especially because it was during time of Ramadan as well. And what really stunned me was that many people said, no, we stuck to plan. We went to our family home. We went to our farm. We did what we planned to do and spend time with family. So that really gave me reassurance. So that was quite, I was very impressed with that. So, yeah. So, and I think it may not be exactly what you were asking for, but to me, this was something that really stood out. So.
No, I definitely qualifies. We had a whole session last week with Wissam, who's also an INSEAD alum, about containment, which is exactly what you're describing, like this ability to just create some kind of wrapper around what's going on and to keep moving. So no, I definitely appreciate that. All right. I know we spoke about a lot of things today, but based on kind of the topic of our conversations, if you had to advise leaders who might be listening to this right now, what would you tell them the next 3 things they should do are in terms of making their organizations more ready for both the present and the future?
Sure. So I'm going to start again with the first. I mean, get ready for any immediate shock to your business. So that means be aware of your cash position. Do exercise based on model, basically, let's call it a 30% revenue shock. What would it actually mean? Real numbers, real examples, real scenarios, not just guesstimates. Number 1. And then number 2, I think I'm going with create really good, or create permission inside your organization for bad news to travel upwards. You want to hear from people in good times and in times of stress. So, and that has to be built over time, that kind of process, that culture, whatever you want to call it, that sense that I'm allowed to say what needs to be said. It will help in a prolonged crisis. The leader basically who hears the truth fastest, or hears the truth, full stop, will be the one that can manage the company better. And the final one, then back to what we started with earlier on, make sure, decide what you're building, what you're now building in times of crisis. Decide that you are building for the future. Don't build for the past that you may like to go back to, but that the ecosystem, the environment may not go back to. So keep your eyes wide open, be flexible, and build your business for the future, as mundane and as basic as this may sound.
Thank you. That's really great advice. I have a lot of thinking to do later today. Thank you, Claudia, for your generosity.
No, thank you very much. And I mean, all the people that didn't get their question, and you know where to find me on LinkedIn. I know I'm terrible sometimes when I'm in class, and this week is one of those weeks from tomorrow onwards, but I will try to get to your question as soon as I can.
Absolutely. There's a few more. We'll make sure to tag you. And again, thank you so much for jumping in, for doing it on such short notice. We know this whole thing was an exercise in agility, so we're very, very grateful.
Yeah.
And thank you to the audience, as always, for being here, for all your questions, for learning with us. We really appreciate it. The session will be available later on YouTube and as a podcast if you'd like to re-listen to it or share it with someone. And again, if you did find value, reach out to Claudia, but also we'd love it if you fill out our survey on leading in the Arab world. It only takes 4 minutes. We'll add the link. We're going to continue this conversation for the rest of this week. You can find the full schedule on our website. And later today, we're hosting Wafa Al-Ubaidat from Playbook for a session titled Individual and Collective, the Power of Community at 4 p.m. Dubai time. We look forward to seeing you there. Thank you for being with us.